Hospital workers, serious, what regrets do you hear from dying patients? He was one of my first patients as a nursing student. Named Frank. He was 92. After knowing him a few days, he disclosed to me his regret was outliving everyone he loved. That he and his wife hadn't had kids. And he was all that was left and that he wanted to see his wife again. I wasn't sure how to respond. So I just listened. And it made me realize how living so long isn't great if everyone you love is gone. He passed away later that week. And while I distinctly recall some of my classmates being upset, I felt relief for him. I knew he was where he wanted to be. I've had many patients since. But you tend to remember your first ones. Other than that, ditto what everyone's saying. More time with family loved ones. Wish they wasted less time with work or other bullshit, etc. Some people just want you to let them go. I had a man with terminal cancer break down crying after his daughters left the room because they wanted him to keep fighting and he just wanted to rest and pass peacefully. Learn when to let go. He wished he had been a better father to his daughter. He wished they had reconnected. His dementia prevented him from remembering they had reconnected years before and that she visited often. I wish I could have made him aware that he had accomplished his last wish. But he died not really understanding that. I worked in long-term care for 12 years. I remember a married couple that shared a room. She had cancer and kidney failure. I was helping her eat lunch one day with her husband sitting there with us. He looked like death, but her husband looked at her, then at me and said, "Have you ever seen a more beautiful woman?" I had to leave and go to the bathroom and cry. I cried for days every time I thought of what he said. I thought I would never know what it was like to be loved like that. I had been divorced for years. I couldn't even tell the story without tearing up. Footnote. I was divorced 23 years when I met Rod. Been together for 11 years. I know that love now. It's never too late. I worked as an oncology nurse right out of nursing school. I was barely 21 years old. Had a patient about my age who was dying of lung cancer. A few hours before he died I sat with him and he was telling me how much he wished that he would have had more time to maybe fall in love, marry, have kids. He was so young. He asked me to call his parents and he died shortly after they arrived. It was awful. His regrets were more about the life not lived. Many older patients had some interesting life stories and most wanted to tell them before they died. Most were at peace with the life they lived. Many regretted working so much and not spending enough time with family. In the ER it's not something most people see coming when they arrive, but it's usually the same regret when they are coherent. They all wish their family was there, which sucks even more lately with COVID since family can't come in initially. Or they cry out for their so in a panic. It's gotten to the point recently where we tell them so is right here with you. The look of relief on people's faces just hearing that gets me every time. People just want to not be alone at the end. I was a hospice nurse. One of my elderly patients had skin cancer. A huge malignant melanoma on the side of his neck that was growing rapidly. He had been a farmer all his life and never married. One night we were talking and I asked him if there was anything he wished he had done differently in his life. And he thought about it a minute and said he wished he had worn a hat when he was farming. I wish he did too. I work in a hospital. Whenever someone is at the end of their life, they always just want to be with their loved ones. Any regrets I've heard is always family related. They wanted more time with the people they love. Most people are at peace with things though. People also tend to wish they took their health seriously. End of life physician here. CPR. No, seriously, hear me out. Imagine using your hands to crush the sternum down 2 inches repeatedly of your 90-year-old grandmother who weighs 90 pounds. So that maybe you can then put her on a ventilator from which she might never get off alive. We ask this of everyone who comes into the hospital, but too often it's asked more like, hey, if you're drowning, do you want us to save you? Rather than what it truly is, especially for those who most likely won't survive it in the first place, and if they do will be significantly worse off than they were before they died. The survival statistics for patients with 1-2 significant comorbidities with an in-hospital cardiac arrest is like 5% to leave alive, and then 30-day survival is 5% of that original 5%, if I remember correctly. I cannot count the number of times families were adamant on having it done to their loved one only to then see what it entails firsthand and beg us not to do it again. I did training to be a CNA and we had to work in a nursing home as part of our training. I didn't really get into any deep conversations with the patients there. But I can say this. If you have family in a nursing home, please visit with them. It's a sad and lonely place to be. Paramedic but close enough. Made a run on a woman in her 30s for shortness of breath. Her and her boyfriend had just moved into an apartment together. They were fighting over something trivial. Which room to unpack first or something. He thought she was just being dramatic. We transported. She never made it. Went from awake and talking to unresponsive and asystolic, no cardiac activity, in a matter of seconds. They were so caught up in a little argument that they never said goodbye. They never told each other they loved them. She didn't have any last words. And honestly, that's even worse. I've worked in long-term care for over a decade. I can't speak for the young. But most often old people regret the things they didn't do. I'm a hospice social worker. So I have the honor of getting to listen to people's life stories. Including favorite memories and regrets. Most regrets center around what they didn't get to do. Like never traveling to Italy when their family was originally from Naples. Some regret not getting specific education, wanting to go to college but never doing it. Some regret their choice in partner. Especially when alcohol-drug abuse was involved. Or cheating. Many express a sadness that looks a lot like regret if they are estranged from family. And some have anticipatory grief from knowing they will miss a milestone. Like the birth of a grandchild. Some regret not taking better care of their health. People with COPD who regret ever having a cigarette. In general, life is long and time smooths some of the rough edges. So people tend to focus on the good. My mom did home health and hospice. My stepdad was very abusive and my mom would take me to work with her to try and protect me. She didn't want to leave him due to religious beliefs. That's a different story. There was an old man. I'd play cards with him. We'd talk about working on the farm we had. He was a nice guy. He figured out I was being physically abused. His health started declining and he couldn't play cards or get out of bed. The last time I saw him, he said he was sorry he wasn't younger and that he couldn't help me. Almost 25 years ago and I still remember him. Not yet. I can't die yet. I still have so much growing to do. I want to see my children and grandchildren grow up. I am a physician trainee who has done a decent amount of palliative care. I have been privileged to hear many stories and be part of many deaths. But I still can't explain why it is that certain lines remain with me and hit me so much harder. The gentleman who told me the line above was in his late 60s, early 70s. It made me reflect on how I view patients in this age group. Yes. Much older than myself. But still with growing and living to do. I also think of a woman in her 50s I met early on in my training. She and her female partner had never married, partly due to laws. Partly because it had never seemed important. When she was diagnosed with metastatic pancreatic cancer, they regretted never making that step. I attended their small wedding in the hospital. She died a few days later. I've been a nurse for 14 years. The one thing that still hits me is a 14-year-old boy fighting cancer. Did the transplant but died fighting the side effects of that transplant. I've nursed him for almost a year and we have grown very close. The day he went away to his home country in the US, I told him I am his big mama, and when he returned, we would be together doing many plans. His dream was to be a doctor. So I told him I would quit my job and be his nurse the moment he becomes a doctor. On the night before he and his family left, my husband, chef, cooked for the family and all the nurses his favorite foods. My husband taught my patient on how to cook the recipes. My patient also loves to cook. We had dinner together and I was crying my eyes out afterwards. He is like a second son to me. His last words to me are, "I will make sure to meet you again." The day I found out from his mother he had passed away, I was devastated. I'll never forget the time working as an EMT when I helped a woman get on a commode. I told her I'd give her some privacy and she grabbed my hand and murmured out a "please stay." I asked her what was wrong and if she was okay. While she was sobbing she was able to break out, "I'm so scared. They just told me I'm dying and don't have a chance anymore." It broke my heart. I stayed and talked with her for a little and comforted her as best I could. Another story is when a regular patient who had many cancer complications was on his last legs. Knew each other by first name. At the night huddle we found out he finally was going to be put on hospice and he bought pizzas for the entire department. I went into his room and tried so f***ing hard not to cry and thank him. I'm so glad I left the hospital setting and went back to being a first responder. It's too depressing. Being alone. Although the ones with family around them face different problems, the ones that have no one there in the end seem to have the toughest time. I worked in hospice. Top regret was not spending time with family and or lost time due to a family feud. Probably number 2 was wasting their life with their spouse, for various reasons, when they could have possibly been with someone they loved, met a soulmate. Number 3 was usually not accomplishing a bucket list item such as living in a foreign country. We were not supposed to let people bring their pets in to say goodbye. Other people could have allergies or an untrained pet could poop somewhere. But I always told family members to smuggle in Fluffy in an oversized purse, Paris Hilton style. Large dogs were harder, but since they were literally emotional support animals at the time, I never told them to leave. Edit. Thank you, fellow Redditor, for my first ever award. And thank you for my second award. WTF. 3 awards. I don't deserve this. Thank you so much. Please just thank your healthcare provider that is working with your loved one. Honestly, nothing meant more to me than a hug from someone. OMG. Thank you for my 3rd and 4th award. This is awesome but undeserved. Taking care of your loved ones is my privilege. There are 3 main themes I've heard after many years of palliative care. 1. Regret about missing future family events, graduation, grandkids, weddings, etc. Close bracket. 2. Regret about staying around TTY people, lousy jobs, abusive or uncaring family members. 3. Regret about not taking better care of themselves. My takeaway: if you smoke or drink too much, stop. Figure out what in you makes you believe it's okay to be treated like shitty. And stop. Tell everyone you care about that you love them as often as you can. It always seems to be things people regret not doing. I wish I had gone to England, and regretting not spending time with the people they love the most. Remember to do what you love and don't do anything during the day that you will regret at night. This was a weird one for me and actually apropos for my current life. I still think about her. Happened maybe 6-7 years ago. Older 70s female with HX of breast cancer. In IQ for sepsis, I believe. I talked to her and she mentioned she was widowed. I gave my condolences and stated that's hard. I'm sorry about your loss. I imagine you miss him. To my surprise she told me no. Actually I don't. I was relieved when he died. I was never happy with him. I didn't leave him because that's not what we did back in the day. So here I wasted many years with a man who didn't treat me well. And now I have cancer. Oof. Life lesson, folks. I used to work in the respiratory ward of a hospital almost a decade ago. I was young and everything and occasionally took a puff of smoke from my friends when we were out drinking. Only a few off times tbh. One of my patients held my hand one day. She was dying and out of breath and I was trying to just be there to calm her down and give some reassurance. She told me to never, ever smoke. She regretted smoking when young as now she is dying because of it. She hates smoking so badly because of all the damage. She described it as drowning. and said that when you are being choked to death and that sensation you are losing your breath is just absolutely terrifying and the worst. Her words stuck with me. And in her final days we kept her as comfortable as we could as she struggled to breathe, with meds and everything. She passed not too long after, but I wasn't working that day. Never forgot her advice. Never took another puff. Edit. Thanks for my first award. I work in a hospital delivering trays to patients. I've had multiple patients that have requested a final meal, only to be gone by the time I get it up to them. I haven't heard their last words, but I think seeing what their last meal would have been says a lot on its own. Semicolon. Edit. Thank you for the award. I have no idea what this means, but it made my day. My grandmother used to be a nurse and she would say, I've seen a lot of people through their last days and heard a lot of regrets. But I have never heard anyone coming up to the end wishing they had spent more time working. As a medical student at Stanford, I got to see some VIP patients. One, in particular, was a middle-aged high-ranking executive at an iconic company. This person was terminally ill and I was tasked with the initial interview. During my history taking, they spoke about the ride up the corporate ladder. It all seemed worthwhile at the time, chasing wealth and prestige. In the end, however, their regret was walking away from opportunities to build a family and invest in meaningful relationships. They poured their soul into the company and yet not a single soul could spare the time to visit them in the hospital. I still remember them in the hospital bed staring out the window with a blank expression. It haunted me for a while but helped me change my focus, especially in an area and field full of high achievers. Not taking their sick leave and PTOs. Grinding their whole life. Not being there for loved ones. I don't know what to make of this. But I worked patient transportation for about 4 years, so I got to encounter a lot of people. The number one thing I always heard was don't get old. It felt like I'd hear it at least a few times a week, if not more often. I won't say much more, but hearing that from dozens of different people with different backgrounds who all end up in the same situation. It makes ya think. FCK getting old. 3 of my grandparents lived to a decent age and died at about was the optimal time for death, if that makes sense. My 4th grandparent, the last one to go, suffered from extreme dementia for a decade before his death, and from partial dementia a decade before that. FCK. That. Ht. Sooner or later, suicide at older ages is going to have to become an acceptable thing. I wouldn't put my worst enemies through that. For what it's worth, he died dancing. The guy loved to sing and dance, and knew every word to every song in every old Timmy musical. For all the suffering he went through, at least he died doing what he loved. I had a teenage girl in my psych ward because she had tried to kill herself by overdosing with pills. Was touch and go, but she was revived and admitted. When her parents could come in and see her once she was awake, she was ugly, crying about how sorry she was for taking the pills and how she didn't want to die. Her parents were sobbing and telling her it was okay and they loved her. And then later they all went home and we didn't see them again. And that's the way I need to tell that story to prevent myself from breaking down and not being able to work there anymore. There is nothing in the spoiler below which is worth knowing, for real. Trigger warning for self-harm. I read the coroner's report into her death a few years later. From a later suicide attempt which was successful. They concluded that no combination of interventions or specialists could have prevented this death. Felt like I got physically punched reading that. Still hurts. Exclamation point. The one I remember most is a sweet elderly lady who I'd been caring for. She'd been through so much in her life and spent so much of it worrying about everything. The night before she passed we sat and talked for a while about anything and everything. I asked her if she could do it all again, would she do anything different? Straight away she told me she wished she had laughed more. Such simple words. But they had a big impact on my life. Had a guy tell me I worked my whole life and this is all I have, pointing at some stuff on his dresser, and my kids aren't even here. Died later that day. Ex-ICU nurse. I had a patient in his 40s once die from AIDS related complications. At the end he developed an acute respiratory infection. And the time that I and my colleagues looked after him was during the span while he was acutely decompensating. We had to intubate, but he quickly became comatose and passed away within a couple days despite all treatment. He came from a religious family, but was estranged due to his homosexuality. He found religion again when he realized he was dying, and it breaks my f***ing heart that he had convinced himself God was punishing him for being gay. Me and my colleagues tried our best, but his belief and his regret was a lifetime deep. And our time with him was so short. I will never forget being at his bedside. He's gasping for air, with him telling me desperately between breaths how this is his punishment from God and he deserved it. He died before we had a chance to even help him, I feel.